I held a piece of paper worth $5 million in my shaking hands. I rushed home 2 hours early, my heart pounding, ready to tell my husband that our financial struggles were finally over. But as I pushed the front door open, the house was dead silent. I walked toward his home office and heard him laughing on the phone. What he said next froze the blood in my veins, and the $5 million secret I was about to share became the ultimate weapon to destroy the trap he had just set for me. My name is Naomi. I am 33 years old, and until a random Thursday afternoon, I thought I was in a happy, although financially stressed marriage. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever discovered a brutal betrayal from the person you trusted most. The day started like any other. I was exhausted. For the past 3 years, I had been pouring every ounce of my energy into my freelance graphic design business and managing my online Etsy shop. It was not a corporate job, but it paid for our groceries and the utility bills. My husband Richard, who was 35 and worked in high-pressure tech sales, never missed an opportunity to remind me that his salary was the real anchor of our household. He called my business a cute little hobby. He made me feel small, but I always swallowed my pride because I believed we were a team building a future together. That afternoon, I stopped at a gas station to grab a bottle of water. On a whim, I bought a single scratch-off lottery ticket. I sat in my sweltering car, the summer heat pressing against the windows, and used a quarter to scratch the silver foil. One matching number, then another, then the prize amount revealed itself. $5 million. I stopped breathing. The air in my lungs just vanished. I rubbed my eyes, convinced the heat was making me hallucinate. But the numbers were undeniably real. $5 million. All the sleepless nights worrying about credit card debt, all the times Richard sighed heavily when I asked for help with a broken appliance, all of it was over. We were rich. We were finally free. Tears of pure joy streamed down my face. I shoved the car into drive and sped toward our house in the suburbs. I could not wait to see the look on Richard's face. I wanted to run into his arms, show him the ticket, and tell him we could finally book that vacation to Europe he had been talking about for years. I pulled into the driveway 2 hours earlier than I usually finished my workday. I practically tripped over my own feet running up the front steps. I unlocked the front door as quietly as possible, wanting to surprise him. The hallway was quiet. I slipped off my shoes and tiptoed toward the back of the house where he kept his home office. The door was cracked open just an inch. I raised my hand to push it open and yell surprise, but his voice drifted through the narrow gap. He was not talking to a client. His tone was casual, cold, and amused. Just file the legal separation papers today. Yes, right now. I want the date stamped on the record before 5 o'clock. My hand froze in midair. My heart, which had been racing with pure euphoria just moments ago, suddenly dropped into my stomach. I pressed my back against the wall in the hallway, clutching the winning lottery ticket against my chest, and held my breath. I am telling you, man, Richard continued, letting out a sharp laugh. I am not giving her a single dime of my end-of-year commission bonus. I worked my tail off for that money. Her little Etsy design studio makes absolute pennies. She sits around drawing on her iPad all day while I grind in the real world. She is practically a financial leech at this point. Once that separation date is legally stamped today, my bonus is completely safe. The silence that followed rang in my ears. I felt physically sick. The man I had loved, the man I was rushing to share a $5 million fortune with, was actively plotting to discard me and leave me with nothing. He spoke again, his voice dripping with arrogance. I will wait a few days to tell her. I will get her to sign over her equity in the house first. She is so naive, she signs whatever financial documents I put in front of her. By the time she realizes we are legally separated, I will have her packed up and out of the door. A cold, sharp clarity washed over me. All the puzzle pieces of his recent behavior snapped into place. The late nights, the sudden secretiveness with his phone, the way he constantly degraded my income to lower my self-esteem. He was orchestrating my financial ruin. But Richard had just made a catastrophic miscalculation. He was rushing to establish a legal date of separation to protect his yearly bonus. He did not realize that by officially declaring us separated, as of this morning, any assets acquired after that exact moment belong solely to the individual who acquired them. I looked down at the lottery ticket in my trembling hand. I bought it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, hours after his lawyer filed those papers. This $5 million did not belong to us. It belonged entirely to me. Suddenly, the floorboards creaked. The office door swung wide open. Richard stepped out, his phone still in his hand, and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me standing in the hallway. I had a fraction of a second to react. I shoved the winning ticket down my shirt, hiding it against my skin, and forced my face into an expression of mild confusion. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a flash of genuine panic. His mouth opened, but for a second no sound came out. Then, like flipping a switch, the panic vanished. The smooth, polished tech salesman returned. He let out a loud exhale and ran a hand through his hair, faking a smile. "Naomi, babe, you startled me. I was just dealing with the most nightmare client on the phone. They are trying to back out of a software contract at the last minute." He walked over and kissed my cheek. His lips felt like ice. I forced a smile, keeping my arms crossed tightly over my chest to conceal the stiff paper of the lottery ticket hidden against my skin. "Oh, I am sorry. I finished my design projects early and thought I would surprise you." He did not notice my trembling. He just nodded, already turning back toward the kitchen. "Well, it is perfect timing. I am actually cooking tonight. Go wash up." I locked myself in the bathroom and carefully pulled the $5 million ticket from my shirt. I hid it inside the lining of my makeup bag, my hands shaking so violently I knocked a bottle of lotion into the sink. The man I had shared my life with for years was a stranger. He was actively destroying my life, and now he was making me dinner. When I walked into the kitchen 30 minutes later, the smell of seared salmon and garlic butter filled the air. Richard had poured 2 large glasses of expensive red wine. He pulled out my chair for me, playing the role of the devoted, loving husband flawlessly. To anyone else, it would look like a scene from a romantic movie. To me, it felt like sitting down to a meal with an executioner. He kept the conversation light, asking about my Etsy shop with fake enthusiasm. He poured more wine into my glass. Then, as I finished my last bite, the real reason for the dinner appeared. Richard cleared his throat and wiped his mouth. He reached over to the kitchen island and grabbed a thick, stapled stack of legal documents. He slid them across the table toward me, right next to my empty plate. "I need a quick favor," he said casually. "I have an incredible opportunity to buy into a new startup venture with some guys from the firm. It is a guaranteed return, Naomi. Life-changing money, but I need liquidity fast. So I drew up the paperwork for a home equity line of credit. Just sign on the highlighted tabs and we can get it processed tomorrow." I stared at the thick stack of papers. A home equity line of credit. He wanted to take a loan out against the value of our house. The house that I had secured the down payment for using the life insurance money my late father left me. Richard was trying to drain the equity out of the house, turn it into cash, and walk away with it right before kicking me out. Normally, I would have signed without reading. I trusted him to handle the big financial decisions. But tonight I picked up the packet and started reading the terms. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It is standard boilerplate stuff, Naomi. You do not need to read the whole thing. Just sign it." I looked up at him, my voice perfectly steady. "This has a variable interest rate of 9%. And it says the funds will be dispersed directly into an account that only has your name on it. Why would I put my house up as collateral for an account I cannot access?" The fake smile slid right off his face. His jaw clenched. He leaned forward, the loving husband act completely gone. "Because I am the one making the investment, Naomi. Because I am the one who actually understands high-level finance. You sell digital stickers on the internet for $5 a pop. I am trying to secure our future and you are sitting here playing lawyer." "I am not playing lawyer," I replied. my heart hammering against my ribs. I am just asking why you need $80,000 of equity from my house on the exact same day you are supposedly getting a massive end-of-year bonus. His eyes darkened. He hated being questioned. He stood up, towering over the table. You are being completely paranoid and ridiculous. I bust my back working 50 hours a week to keep the lights on in this place so you can play artist, and the one time I ask for your support on a business venture, you interrogate me like a criminal. You are incredibly ungrateful. He threw his cloth napkin onto his plate. The wine glass rattled. I am taking a shower. Have it signed by the time I get out. He stormed out of the kitchen, his heavy footsteps pounding up the wooden stairs. I sat frozen in the silence of the dining room. He was trying to rob me blind before throwing me away. I stood up to clear the dishes. As I walked past the kitchen island, the screen of his iPad, which he had left sitting next to the fruit bowl, suddenly lit up. He had not locked it. A quiet chime echoed in the kitchen. A new email notification dropped down from the top of the glowing screen. The sender was his attorney. I stepped closer, my eyes locking onto the bold black text of the message preview, and the final piece of his sickening puzzle fell perfectly into place. The subject line read, "Urgent update regarding your filing." I tapped the screen, holding my breath as the full email expanded. The message was painfully brief but devastatingly clear. It read, "Richard, confirmation received. Your date of legal separation is officially recorded by the county clerk as of 9 o'clock this morning. Your end-of-year bonus and all future earnings are now completely protected from Naomi. Let me know when you secure her signature on the equity loan, and we will proceed with the eviction notice." I stared at the glowing screen until the words blurred. The sheer audacity of his plan was breathtaking. He had filed for legal separation at 9 in the morning entirely behind my back to make sure I would not see a single penny of his corporate bonus. He wanted to drain the equity from the house, plunge me into debt with a variable rate loan, and then serve me with eviction papers. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he had built an impenetrable wall around his money. Family law in our state was incredibly rigid about the date of separation. Once that paperwork was filed and stamped by the county clerk, the marital financial community was legally dead. Anything he earned was his. But crucially, anything I earned was mine. His greed had just handed me the ultimate victory. I looked at the clock on the microwave. I replayed my afternoon in my head. I had stopped at the gas station exactly at 2 o'clock. 5 hours after his lawyer had officially stamped our marriage as financially severed. In the eyes of the law, as of 9 o'clock this morning, any money I made, any debt I took on, and any assets I acquired were mine and mine alone. Richard had dug a grave for my financial future, but he had just thrown himself inside and handed me the shovel. The $5 million lottery ticket sitting in my bathroom was legally, completely, and entirely mine. He had no claim to it, not a fraction of a cent. A genuine smile, the first real smile I had felt in months, spread across my face. It was not a smile of joy, but a sharp, cold smile of absolute survival. I did not need to scream at him. I did not need to cry or beg for an explanation. I just needed to leave. I quietly backed away from the kitchen island, leaving his iPad exactly where it was. I crept upstairs to our bedroom, listening to the sound of the shower running in the master bath. I pulled a small duffel bag from the back of my closet. I moved with swift, silent precision. I packed 3 days' worth of clothes, my laptop, my charging cables, and my external hard drives containing all my freelance client work. My birth certificate, my passport, and my social security card all went into the bottom of the bag. I knew how vindictive Richard could be. Once he realized I was gone, he would try to lock me out of the house and hold my personal documents hostage. I was not going to give him that leverage. I went into his home office and opened his heavy metal filing cabinet. I bypassed the junk mail and grabbed the thick green folder containing the deed to the house, which was still tied to the life insurance money my father left me. I stuffed it into my bag. I was not going to let him steal my home or my sanity. I zipped the duffel bag closed and slung it over my shoulder. I walked back into the guest bathroom, retrieved the winning lottery ticket from my makeup bag, and tucked it securely into the hidden zipper pocket of my jacket. I was ready. I was going to walk out the front door, check into a hotel, and hire the most ruthless family law attorney in the city the minute the sun came up. I crept down the stairs, carefully avoiding the second step that I knew always creaked. The shower stopped running upstairs. I had maybe 2 minutes before he came downstairs, demanding that I sign the predatory loan papers. I reached the front door and wrapped my hand around the cool brass of the doorknob. Freedom was right on the other side. But before I could turn the handle, heavy headlights swept across the living room windows, blinding me for a second. The loud crunch of gravel echoed from the driveway. I froze. I peeked through the sheer curtains and my stomach tied itself into a knot. A massive black SUV had just parked directly behind my car, completely blocking me in. The heavy car doors slammed shut, and loud, obnoxious laughter pierced the quiet suburban evening. I recognized that harsh laugh immediately. It belonged to my toxic mother-in-law, Diane. And stepping out of the driver's side was Richard's arrogant brother-in-law, Jamal, followed closely by his sister, Olivia. They had not called. They had not texted. They were ambushing me, no doubt coordinated by Richard to gang up on me and force me to sign those loan documents before the night was over. My heart sank as I watched them march up the front walkway, Jamal already pointing critically at the exterior paint of my house. I was not getting out tonight. The war was coming straight into my living room, and I was going to have to face them all. I dropped my duffel bag behind the living room sofa, completely out of sight, just as the front door swung wide open. Richard had not even bothered to lock it after he came inside. Diane strolled in first, wearing her signature oversized designer sunglasses, even though the sun was rapidly setting outside. She looked around my living room with the exact same expression someone might use when inspecting a dirty public restroom. Olivia followed closely behind, aggressively tapping away on her smartphone screen, completely ignoring my existence in my own home. Then came Jamal. He stepped through the doorway wearing a sharp, custom-tailored navy suit that likely cost more than my first car. He did not say hello. He did not even nod in my direction. Instead, he immediately started pacing the length of my living room hardwood floor, his expensive leather shoes clicking loudly, shaking his head in profound disappointment. Richard, hearing the loud commotion, hurried down the wooden stairs. His face lit up with a forced, overly enthusiastic smile that made my stomach turn. He hugged his mother tightly and did a quick, practiced handshake with Jamal. It was sickeningly obvious that they had planned this entire ambush. They wanted to corner me, outnumber me, and brutally bully me into signing away the equity of my home tonight. Jamal crossed his arms and looked directly at Richard, completely disregarding the fact that I was standing just 3 feet away from him. Richard, man. I am telling you right now, this neighborhood is depreciating by the minute. You need to dump this place as soon as possible. The housing market is shifting fast, and sitting on this outdated property is a terrible financial move. Let me broker you a luxury condo downtown. You need a place that actually matches your new corporate title, not this sinking suburban trap. I clenched my jaw so hard, my teeth ached. He was talking about my home. The home I had meticulously decorated, the home I had poured my heart and soul into, and most importantly, the home that my father's life insurance policy had secured the down payment for. Richard nodded solemnly, playing his role in their little theatrical script perfectly. I know, Jamal. I have been thinking the exact same thing lately. It is just a matter of getting the equity sorted out and restructuring our assets. Diane ran her manicured finger along the edge of my antique wooden coffee table and dramatically wiped imaginary dust onto her expensive slacks. Well, Richard, you have to be extremely smart about your investments moving forward. You absolutely cannot keep carrying dead weight. She shot a pointed, icy glare directly into my eyes. Some people do not understand how real money works. They think drawing little pictures on a computer all day is a legitimate substitute for a real high-earning career. Olivia finally looked up from her glowing phone screen and snickered loudly. Yeah, how is the little digital sticker business going, Naomi? Are you still making enough pennies to buy the weekly groceries? Or is my brother paying for all of those too? Now I stood my ground, my heart hammering violently against my ribs, but I forced my voice to remain incredibly level and calm. I am quite surprised to see all of you here tonight. We were certainly not expecting any company. Jamal let out a loud, mocking laugh that bounced off the living room walls. Family does not need a formal written invitation, Naomi. Besides, this is strictly a business meeting. We are here to help Richard optimize his financial portfolio and make some tough adult decisions. With a smooth, highly practiced motion, Jamal reached into his tailored suit jacket pocket. He did not pull out a pen or a notebook to take notes. He pulled out a sleek, heavy metal measuring tape. The sharp metallic snap of the tape extending echoed like a gunshot in the tense, quiet living room. He walked right past me, his shoulder brushing uncomfortably close to mine, and hooked the metal end of the tape against the baseboard near my front bay window. He dragged the metal tape aggressively across my vintage area rug, calculating the room's square footage allowed for everyone to hear. "If we completely tear down this load-bearing wall right here," he muttered, entirely ignoring my sheer existence, "we can completely open up the floor plan. It will photograph much better for the premium Zillow listing. The kitchen needs a total gut job, obviously. Those cabinets are a nightmare. But I have an elite crew on standby. I can have this entire place staged, photographed, and on the market in 2 weeks, tops." I stared at him, watching him measure my living room walls as if I had already been legally evicted and thrown out onto the street. He was pricing my sanctuary like a piece of cheap meat at a wholesale butcher shop. They really thought I was incredibly weak. They truly believed I would just crumble under the heavy pressure of their collective arrogance and sign my entire life away without a fight. But they had absolutely no idea about the $5 million secret currently secured inside my jacket pocket, or the irreversible legal trap Richard had foolishly locked himself into just a few hours ago. I watched Jamal hook his metal measuring tape against the baseboard. The sheer disrespect of it all should have made me burst into tears, but the knowledge of the $5 million resting securely against my chest acted like an impenetrable shield of armor. I did not run upstairs to cry. I did not yell at them to leave. Instead, I calmly walked past Richard, past his smirking sister, Olivia, and headed straight for the kitchen counter. I picked up the open bottle of expensive red wine Richard had poured earlier and filled my glass to the brim. The sound of the liquid splashing into the crystal glass made everyone in the room pause. I took a slow and deliberate sip. The wine tasted remarkably bitter, but it grounded me. I turned around and leaned against the granite counter, crossing my ankles. I looked directly at Jamal, who had stopped measuring and was staring at me with a confused expression. "Jamal," I said, my voice cutting through the thick tension in the room like a freshly sharpened knife. "If you are going to measure the square footage for a hypothetical real estate listing, you should probably make sure you actually understand who owns the equity you are so eager to liquidate." Jamal stood up straight, letting the metal tape snap back into its casing with a loud crack. He adjusted his expensive navy suit jacket and scoffed. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance, the exact same look he always gave me at family gatherings. "I know exactly how equity works, Naomi. Richard has been paying the mortgage on this place for years, while your little art business barely scrapes by. He is the primary breadwinner, which means he holds the financial leverage in this household. I'm just trying to help my brother-in-law escape a sinking ship and maximize his portfolio. You should be thanking me." I took another sip of wine, feeling a cold and calm energy wash over me. I let his arrogant words hang in the air for a moment before I completely dismantled them. "You are absolutely right about one thing," I replied smoothly. "Richard has been paying the monthly mortgage, but a mortgage is just a monthly bill. The actual equity, the foundation of this property, was established 5 years ago with a $200,000 down payment. And every single cent of that down payment came directly from my late father's life insurance policy. I wrote the check, Jamal, not Richard." The room suddenly went dead silent. Richard shifted his weight uncomfortably and looked away, his jaw clenching tightly. He had obviously never mentioned that minor detail to his arrogant brother-in-law. He had let his family believe he single-handedly bought this house to fuel his own fragile ego. I set my wine glass down on the counter with a heavy thud. So before you start tearing down my load-bearing walls to build an open-concept kitchen, you need to understand that this house is built on my family money, not Richard's tech commissions. Mine. And unless you want me to report you to the state real estate board for attempting to broker a property without the consent of the primary equity holder, I suggest you put that measuring tape back in your pocket and step away from my walls. Jamal's confident posture crumbled slightly. His eyes darted toward Richard for confirmation, but Richard just stared at the floor, refusing to make eye contact. Jamal swallowed hard, his professional facade slipping. Besides, I continued taking a step closer to the living room, my voice dripping with mock sympathy. I am not entirely sure you are the elite broker you claim to be, Jamal. Did you not just lose that massive listing over on Elm Street last month because you forgot to disclose a termite infestation to the buyers? And what about the luxury condo downtown? The one that sat on the market for 9 straight months until the sellers fired you and went with a different agency. Maybe you should focus on passing your quarterly compliance exams instead of trying to sell a house that legally does not belong to you. Olivia gasped loudly, dropping her phone onto her lap. The sharp thud echoed loudly in the quiet room. Jamal's face turned a deep shade of red. He opened his mouth to defend his bruised ego, sputtering, trying to form a coherent sentence, but before he could speak, Diane marched forward. My mother-in-law pushed past Jamal, her expensive heels stabbing into my vintage rug. Her face was contorted with absolute fury. She ripped her designer sunglasses off her face and pointed a sharp, manicured finger directly at my chest. The fake pleasantries were entirely gone. "How dare you speak to him that way?" Diane hissed, her voice trembling with venom. Jamal is a highly successful businessman who actually contributes to society. He provides a lavish lifestyle for my daughter, and Richard breaks his back every single day to keep a roof over your ungrateful head. You have absolutely no right to stand in this house drinking wine my son paid for and disrespecting this family. You are nothing but a financial parasite, Naomi. And if you think a sob story about your dead father's insurance money is going to stop Richard from taking what is rightfully his, you are more delusional than I ever thought. I stared at Diane. Her chest was heaving, her eyes narrowed with pure malice. Instead of backing down or crumbling into the tears she so desperately wanted to see, I subtly slid my right hand into the front pocket of my jeans. My thumb found the side button of my phone. With 2 quick practice taps, I activated the voice memo recorder app. If they wanted to play dirty and gang up on me in my own living room, I was going to capture every single venomous word of their confession. Taking what is rightfully his, I repeated. I kept my voice intentionally soft and shaky, perfectly playing the role of the defeated, confused wife. I have worked 12-hour days building my graphic design business from scratch. I pay our grocery bills. I pay the utilities. I pay the property taxes. How is my contribution not real money to you? Diane let out a harsh, barking laugh that grated against my ears. She walked over to my kitchen island, running her hand over the granite, and swiped her hand dismissively through the air. Selling digital stickers to teenagers on the internet is a hobby, Naomi. It is a pathetic little arts and crafts project to keep you busy. Richard is a director of sales at a massive tech firm. He attends elite corporate galas. He networks with venture capitalists. He needs a wife with a real corporate job, someone who actually elevates his social standing and understands high-level finance. He does not need someone who sits around in her pajamas all day playing with an iPad. She stepped closer to Richard, placing a proud, protective hand on his shoulder. I looked at my husband, waiting for him to defend me, to say that my work mattered. But Richard did not defend me. He just stood there, his arms crossed casually over his chest, a sickeningly arrogant smirk playing on his lips. He was enjoying this. He loved watching his mother tear me down to elevate his own fragile ego. "So this is it then," I said, letting a slight tremble enter my voice to bait her further into the trap. "You all just barged in here today to force me out onto the street. Was this a spontaneous family decision? Or have you been plotting to steal my house for a while?" Diane took the bait effortlessly. Her raging narcissism could never resist an opportunity to brag about how smart and strategic she thought she was. "Oh, please, Naomi," she scoffed, her voice echoing clearly toward my hidden phone microphone. "Richard realized you were dead weight months ago. We have been consulting with the top family attorneys in the city since October. We knew we had to wait until he filed the legal separation papers today to legally protect his end-of-year bonus." "You actually think my son is stupid enough to let a freeloader like you take half of his hard-earned corporate commission? We planned this perfectly. By the time you even realized what was happening, the legal wall was already built and secured." My heart did a triumphant flip inside my chest. She had just admitted on a crystal-clear audio recording that this was a premeditated, coordinated campaign of financial abuse designed to hide marital assets. The family court judge was going to absolutely crucify them for this recorded admission. Richard nodded slowly, entirely oblivious to the legal trap his mother had just walked right into. "It is nothing personal, Naomi. It is just business. You are holding me back. You can pack up your little studio tonight. Jamal has a renovation crew coming tomorrow morning to start the kitchen demolition, so I need you out of the guest room immediately." "I see," I replied, my voice returning to its calm, icy tone. "And tell me, Richard, when you and your lawyers were so busy protecting your precious bonus, did you happen to protect that secret credit card you have been using? The one with the massive balance?" Richard's smirk faltered instantly. His eyes darted toward his mother, then back to me. A flicker of genuine panic crossed his face. He opened his mouth to formulate a lie, but before he could speak, the sharp, sudden chime of the front doorbell echoed loudly through the house. The timing was so abrupt that everyone in the room jumped. Jamal stopped inspecting the crown molding. Olivia looked up from her glowing phone screen. Diane frowned, clearly annoyed by the sudden interruption to her victory speech. "Are you expecting a package delivery at this hour?" Diane snapped, glaring at me as if I had orchestrated the interruption on purpose. "No," I replied truthfully, my eyes fixed intently on Richard. Richard checked his expensive wristwatch. A strange, twisted smile spread across his face, replacing his momentary panic. He did not look surprised at all. In fact, he looked like he had been waiting for this exact moment all evening. "That is not a delivery," Richard said, his voice dripping with cruel anticipation. He turned his back on me and walked confidently toward the front entryway. He grabbed the brass handle and pulled the heavy wooden door wide open. Standing on the front porch, under the glow of the amber porch light, was a young woman. She looked to be in her late 20s, wearing a tight maternity dress that clearly highlighted a heavily pregnant belly. In her right hand, she gripped the handle of a large, expensive rolling suitcase. The young woman stepped over the threshold, pulling her heavy suitcase behind her. The plastic wheels clattered loudly against the hardwood floor. She brushed a strand of blonde hair out of her face and let out a dramatic, exhausted sigh. She did not look at me. She looked directly at Richard. Richard did not gasp. He did not look like a man who had just been caught living a double life. Instead, he looked mildly annoyed, like a manager dealing with an impatient client who had shown up to a meeting 15 minutes early. He reached out, took the handle of her suitcase, and rolled it into the center of my living room. I stood frozen by the kitchen island, my phone still secretly recording in my pocket. "Who is this, Richard?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Richard turned to face me. He crossed his arms, his posture defensive and completely unapologetic. "This is Brittany. She is exhausted from the drive, so she is going to be staying here from now on." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline of a sick joke that was never going to come. "Staying here," I repeated. "Yes, staying here," Richard said, his tone turning sharp and impatient. "Let us stop playing games, Naomi. The marriage is over. You heard my mother. The legal separation is filed. Brittany is 5 months pregnant and she is having my son. I need to prioritize my actual family now." I want your graphic design studio trash cleared out of the guest room by the end of the week so we can start setting up the nursery." The sheer brutality of his words hung heavily in the air. He was moving his pregnant mistress into my house on the exact same day he filed for legal separation, all while his entire family stood by and watched. As if on cue, Diane rushed forward. She completely bypassed me, shoving her shoulder past mine and threw her arms open. "Oh, Brittany, sweetheart!" Diane cooed, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet affection I had never once heard directed at me. "You poor thing. You must be absolutely exhausted from the drive. Come sit down on the sofa. Let me get you a glass of water." Olivia immediately chimed in, rushing to Brittany's side to take her coat. "Do you need a pillow for your back?" Olivia asked eagerly. "We were just talking about tearing out that awful kitchen so you have a nice open space for the baby." I watched the scene unfold with a terrifying sense of clarity. They all knew. Diane knew. Olivia knew. Even Jamal, who was standing by the window with a smug smirk on his face, knew. The secret credit card with the massive balance was not for a business venture. It was for Brittany. They had all been laughing behind my back, plotting to throw me out onto the street so they could move this woman into the home my father had helped me buy. Most women would have screamed. Most women would have thrown the glass of red wine right into Richard's arrogant face. They would have collapsed onto the floor, sobbing hysterically, begging for an explanation. Richard was standing there, his jaw clenched, bracing himself for a massive emotional explosion, but I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. The $5 million lottery ticket tucked securely inside my jacket pocket felt like a warm, glowing shield of invincibility. Richard thought he was delivering a fatal blow to my life, but he had absolutely no idea that his hasty legal separation had just protected my massive fortune. I looked at Richard, then at Brittany, who was now sitting comfortably on my vintage rug sofa, rubbing her pregnant belly. "Okay," I said softly. Richard blinked, clearly thrown off balance by my complete lack of emotion. "Okay," he echoed suspiciously. "Yes, okay," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "I will go pack a bag for the night. You all can have the living room." I turned my back on them and walked slowly toward the home office. I could feel their confused stares burning into my back, but I kept my head held high. I stepped into the dimly lit office where I had hidden my duffel bag earlier. I slung the heavy strap over my shoulder. As I turned to leave, my eyes fell on Richard's large mahogany desk. Sitting right next to his dual monitors was his silver external backup hard drive. It was the master drive, the one he used to back up his phone, his personal emails, his tax documents, and his hidden financial folders. Without missing a beat, I reached out, snatched the heavy silver drive off the desk, and dropped it silently into my duffel bag. I pulled my coat tightly around my shoulders, walked straight past the family of traders in the living room without saying another word, and stepped out the front door. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind me, sealing them inside the trap they had built for themselves. I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching beneath my boots, and unlocked my car. I was not just leaving a toxic marriage. I was walking away as a millionaire, and tomorrow I was going to hire the most ruthless family law attorney in the state. I drove for 20 minutes without a specific destination in mind. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The adrenaline that had propelled me out of my own living room was slowly beginning to fade, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. I pulled into the flickering neon parking lot of a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. It was the kind of place with peeling paint on the doors and a front office that smelled strongly of stale coffee and industrial bleach. It was a far cry from my manicured suburban neighborhood, but it was safe, and most importantly, it was far away from Richard and his toxic family. I grabbed my duffel bag from the passenger seat and walked into the small lobby. A tired-looking clerk behind thick plexiglass barely glanced up from his magazine. I asked for a single room for 3 nights. He tapped a few keys on his ancient computer and asked for my card. I pulled my standard bank debit card from my wallet and slid it under the glass. He swiped it. The machine beeped a harsh, flat tone. He frowned and swiped it again. "It says declined, lady," he mumbled, pushing the card back toward me. I stared at the little plastic rectangle in absolute disbelief. "That is impossible," I said, my voice rising slightly. "That account has at least $12,000 in it. We use it for our monthly household expenses." The clerk shrugged, clearly used to this kind of drama. "I do not know what to tell you. The machine says the account is frozen or closed. Do you have another form of payment? Or am I giving this room to someone else?" A wave of fresh anger washed over me. Richard had not just moved his pregnant mistress into my house. He had immediately called the bank and drained or frozen our joint checking and savings accounts. He was trying to financially starve me out on the very first night. He wanted me sleeping in my car. He wanted me crawling back to the house by morning begging for scraps, entirely willing to sign his predatory home equity loan just to survive. He was a monster, but I was not a victim anymore. I reached into the hidden zippered compartment of my wallet. I bypassed the useless joint cards and pulled out a plain silver credit card. It was a private account I had opened years ago tied strictly to my freelance graphic design business. Richard never had the account number, and he certainly did not have the authority to freeze it. I slid the silver card under the glass. The machine beeped a cheerful approval. I spent the night in a room that smelled like old smoke, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. I barely slept. I kept my hand resting over the pocket of my jacket where the lottery ticket was safely tucked away. The second the sun came up, I was back in my car. I drove straight to a large high-security bank downtown. I walked in right as the heavy glass doors opened for business and requested the largest safety deposit box they had available. The banker led me into a secure windowless vault in the back of the building. He handed me a sleek metal key and left me alone. I unzipped my jacket, pulled out the winning lottery ticket, and placed it gently inside the cool metal box. I locked it and slipped the key onto my key ring. The physical weight of carrying $5 million was finally off my chest, but the legal battle was just beginning. I walked out of the bank feeling like a phantom. Richard thought I was broke, homeless, and terrified. He had no idea I was sitting on a massive fortune, and more importantly, he had no idea I possessed his master backup hard drive. I sat in the driver's seat of my car and pulled out my cell phone. I searched online for the most aggressive, ruthless family law attorney in the entire state. I purposely bypassed the cheap mediators and the friendly neighborhood lawyers. I wanted a bloodthirsty shark. I found a prestigious downtown law firm that specifically specialized in high-asset divorces and corporate financial fraud recovery. I dialed the main office number, and when the receptionist answered, I did not hesitate for a second. "My husband filed for a legal separation yesterday morning to hide his financial assets," I said, my voice steady. "But I have his master computer hard drive, and I need an emergency consultation right now. I will pay whatever retainer you require." I pulled out my silver business credit card again. The war had officially started. Within an hour, I was sitting in a leather chair in a sleek, glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of a downtown skyscraper. Across the table sat Caroline, a senior partner with a reputation for completely dismantling arrogant executives in family court. She wore a sharp, tailored suit and possessed a cold, analytical stare that made me incredibly glad she was on my side. I placed my duffel bag on the polished mahogany table and pulled out Richard's silver external hard drive. I slid it across the glass. "He filed for legal separation yesterday morning," I explained, keeping my voice steady. "He froze our joint accounts last night and moved his pregnant mistress into my house. He thinks I am completely locked out of his finances and terrified of being homeless. But this drive contains the backup of his entire digital life. I need you to find every single hidden account, every offshore transfer, and every piece of leverage I can use to destroy him." Caroline did not offer hollow sympathy. She just smiled, a predatory, razor-sharp smile. She called in a forensic accounting tech who immediately connected the silver drive to an isolated laptop. the screen flooded with hundreds of folders, encrypted files, and backed up email archives. Caroline cracked her knuckles and started digging. It only took her 20 minutes to find the hidden folders Richard thought were completely secure. They were buried under fake client names and dummy software project titles. As Caroline clicked through the spreadsheets and PDF statements, the true depth of my husband's betrayal splashed across the monitor. He was not just hiding a massive end-of-year corporate bonus. He had been systematically bleeding our marital estate dry. Carolyn clicked open a statement from an exclusive platinum credit card that I had never seen before. The current balance was staggering: $60,000. My stomach twisted into a tight knot as I leaned closer to the screen, reading the itemized transaction history. He was not investing in startup ventures or networking with venture capitalists like he told his mother. He was funding a lavish second life. There were receipts for a $10,000 diamond tennis bracelet. There were charges for a luxurious week-long vacation in Cabo San Lucas, booked at a 5-star resort, while I was home working late to pay our winter heating bill. There were thousands of dollars spent at high-end maternity boutiques, expensive dinners at restaurants we could never afford, and massive cash withdrawals at ATMs near Brittany's old apartment complex. He spent $60,000 of marital funds on his mistress. I whispered the sheer scale of his financial infidelity, leaving me breathless. Caroline leaned back in her leather chair, her eyes narrowing, as she processed the legal implications of the spreadsheet. He did not just spend it, Naomi. He leveraged it against your joint financial standing. Look at the dates on these massive purchases. He maxed out this secret credit card over the last 6 months, right up until yesterday morning when he officially filed the separation paperwork. I frowned, trying to understand the strategy. Why would he rack up that much debt right before filing? If he has a huge bonus coming, why not just pay it off quietly? Because he is incredibly greedy and fundamentally cruel, Caroline explained calmly. In this state, any debt acquired during the marriage before the official date of separation is considered community debt. By keeping this card a secret and maxing it out before he filed the papers yesterday, he legally locked that $60,000 balance into the marital estate. A cold chill washed over me as her words registered. He wants me to pay for it. Exactly, Caroline said, pointing a gold pen at the screen. He wants to walk away with his entire end-of-year bonus protected by the separation date, but he wants the family court to split this $60,000 debt right down the middle. He is trying to force you to pay $30,000 for his mistress's diamond bracelets and luxury vacations. He set up this timeline specifically to dump his financial garbage onto you while running away with the gold. His sheer malice was hard to comprehend. He had manipulated the legal system to trap me in a cage of debt while he paraded around as a wealthy, successful tech director. He thought I would be so overwhelmed and desperate that I would just accept a mediator's ruling and take the debt just to get the divorce over with. But Caroline was not finished. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous intensity. Luckily for you, she said, her voice dropping to a low, confident register. The law has a specific term for what Richard just did. It is called marital waste. When one spouse intentionally dissipates marital assets on a non-marital purpose, like an illicit affair, the court does not just forgive it. If we can prove he spent this money on his mistress, the judge will assign 100% of that debt entirely to him. She tapped the silver hard drive. And thanks to this little device, we have every single receipt, email, and booking confirmation we need to nail him to the wall. He thought he built a brilliant trap, Naomi, but he just handed us the match to burn his entire life to the ground. I took a deep breath, letting Caroline's words sink in. The match to burn his life to the ground. It sounded beautiful, but there was one more massive piece of leverage we needed to lock down before we went on the offensive. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small metal key to my safety deposit box. There is something else, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Something Richard does not know about. Something that happened yesterday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 hours after his legal separation date was officially stamped. Caroline raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. What did you do, Naomi? I bought a winning lottery ticket, I replied, meeting her sharp gaze. For $5 million. For the first time since I walked into her immaculate office, Caroline was completely speechless. She dropped her gold pen onto the mahogany table. It hit the glass with a sharp clink. She stared at me for 3 full seconds before a slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. You are sitting on $5 million of separate property, she said, her tone filled with absolute reverence, and he just handed away his legal right to claim a single penny of it. Exactly, I said, but I need to claim it without him finding out until the divorce is finalized. If he knows I have that kind of money right now, he will drag this out in family court for years, just out of spite. Caroline immediately sprang into action. She buzzed her paralegal and ordered a mountain of specific legal forms. We are going to set up a blind trust, she explained rapidly. In this state, you can claim lottery winnings anonymously through a legal entity. We will name the trust something entirely untraceable. Let us call it Phoenix 33. You will be the sole beneficiary, but your name will never appear on the public winner registry, the news, or any asset search Richard tries to run. For the next 4 hours, I sat in that glass conference room navigating a labyrinth of complex legal paperwork. I signed formation documents, non-disclosure agreements, and fiduciary appointments. My hand ached, but every stroke of the pen was another brick in the fortress I was building around my new life. While I worked through the dense legalese, my cell phone sitting next to me on the table began to vibrate aggressively. It buzzed once, then, twice, then continuously. I glanced down at the screen. Richard was bombarding me with text messages. The preview notifications flashed across the glass, painting a pathetic picture of a man desperate to maintain control over his victim. Where are you? You cannot just run away from your financial obligations. You have until tonight to come back and sign the equity loan. If you do not, I am cutting off your phone line. You are going to be completely bankrupt by the end of the month, Naomi. You have no real income. You will be homeless if you do not cooperate. Brittany needs the guest room cleared out today. Do not make me throw your computer trash into the driveway. I watched the frantic threats roll in, feeling absolutely nothing but cold contempt. He thought he was intimidating a helpless broke artist. He had no idea he was texting a multimillionaire who had just secured his financial execution orders. I turned the phone screen face down and went back to signing the trust documents. I was not going to engage with his petty manipulation. I was going to let him continue digging his own grave. By the time the sun began to set over the city skyline, the blind trust was fully established and my lottery winnings were legally shielded. Caroline gathered the thick stack of signed papers and locked them in her secure filing cabinet. We have the hard drive and we have the trust, Caroline said, leaning against her desk. Now we wait for his lawyer to make the first official move regarding the house. Just as she said the word house, my phone vibrated one last time. It was a new text message, but it was not from Richard. The sender name read Jamal. I picked up the phone and opened the message. The sheer arrogance of his words made my blood run cold. Hey Naomi, the text read. Richard gave me the spare keys to the house. I have an elite buyer coming to walk through the property tomorrow morning at 10 sharp. I know you are probably emotional right now, but do not make this hard. Be gone before we get there. I stared at the glowing screen. Jamal was actually going to trespass into my home, the home secured by my father's life insurance money, and try to sell my property out from under me to appease Richard. The audacity was suffocating. I looked up at Caroline and handed her the phone. Her predatory smile returned sharper than ever. Caroline read the text message and let out a low, dangerous chuckle. She slid the phone back across the glass table. You have a legal right to be in your home, Naomi. There is no court order keeping you away, and there certainly is no signed listing agreement with this Jamal character. Go over there tomorrow morning. Disrupt the showing. Make sure those buyers know exactly what kind of fraudulent mess he is trying to drag them into. Just do not lay a hand on anyone. Keep it strictly professional, and keep it terrifying. I did not sleep that night in my motel room. I was too fueled by adrenaline and the sheer audacity of my husband's family. The next morning, I parked my car down the street from my own house right at 9:55. Sure enough, Jamal's obnoxiously loud sports car pulled into my driveway exactly at 10 o'clock, followed closely by a sleek silver sedan. Two well-dressed people stepped out of the sedan and followed Jamal to the front porch. I waited 5 minutes, letting them get comfortable inside, before I walked up the driveway and unlocked the front door with my own key. The sound of Jamal's slick salesman voice drifted from the kitchen. "As you can see, the natural light in here is absolutely incredible," Jamal was saying. "The current owner is highly motivated to sell quickly. We are prepared to offer a very aggressive price if we can close by the end of the month. We can even throw in the premium appliances." I rounded the corner and stepped into the kitchen. Jamal was standing by the marble island, gesturing expansively to the elite couple who were nodding politely. "The current owner is not motivated to sell," I said loudly. My voice echoed off the tile floor, shattering the quiet suburban morning. "In fact, the current owner is standing right here, and she is telling you this house is absolutely not on the market." Jamal whipped around, his eyes widening in sheer panic. His smooth salesman facade evaporated instantly. "Naomi, what are you doing here? You are supposed to be completely moved out by now." I ignored him completely and turned my attention directly to the shocked couple. "Hi, my name is Naomi. I am the legal owner of this property. My father's life insurance policy paid the down payment. This house is currently the subject of a highly contested legal separation and a severe financial fraud investigation. If you give this man a single dollar of earnest money, it will be tied up in litigation for the next 5 years." The prospective buyers exchanged a horrified look. The husband immediately took a step back toward the front hallway. "Jamal, you told us this property was fully cleared for a rapid cash sale. We are not getting involved in a messy divorce dispute over a clouded title." "We are leaving right now. Wait, please just let me explain." Jamal stammered, his face turning a blotchy red as he chased after them. "She is just the disgruntled ex-wife. Richard holds all the equity. Richard holds a mountain of secret credit card debt," I called out after them. The front door slammed shut. The buyers were gone. Jamal stood in the entryway, breathing heavily, his hands clenched into tight fists. He glared at me, his chest heaving with rage. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Jamal yelled. "You just cost me a massive commission. Richard authorized me to show this property. You have no right to barge in here and sabotage my livelihood." "Your livelihood?" I laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "You used a stolen key to enter my property and attempt an illegal real estate transaction without the consent of the deed holder. That is criminal trespassing, Jamal. And attempting to sell a house without full disclosure of a pending legal dispute is a massive violation of the state real estate ethics code. I have half a mind to call the licensing board right now and have your broker license permanently revoked." Jamal opened his mouth, but no words came out. The threat to his precious real estate license hit him right in the chest. He knew I was right. He knew he had crossed a massive legal line that could end his career. Without another word, he turned around, threw the front door open, and sprinted to his sports car. He peeled out of the driveway, desperate to put distance between himself and his own illegal actions. I stood alone in my hallway, victorious. But the victory lasted only a few seconds. Heavy footsteps pounded down the wooden stairs. Richard appeared on the landing, his face contorted in absolute fury. He was wearing his expensive pajamas, clearly woken up by the shouting. "I warned you not to come back here," Richard hissed, pulling his cell phone out of his pocket. "You think you can just walk in and ruin my plans? You do not own me, Naomi. You have zero leverage." Instead of arguing, I watched as he dialed 3 numbers and lifted the phone to his ear. "Yes, hello, police," Richard said, his voice instantly transforming into a calm, distressed tone. "I need an officer dispatched to my residence immediately. My estranged wife has illegally broken into my home. She is harassing my family and refusing to leave." The police arrived 10 minutes later. Richard played the victim, but his smug smile vanished when I handed the officers the property deed. The officers informed him that no crime was committed. They ordered Jamal to leave immediately or face trespassing charges. I left peacefully on my own terms, walking past Richard's furious face. I had accomplished exactly what I came to do. I ruined their illegal open house and established a police record. 3 weeks passed. I rented a very comfortable extended stay apartment downtown using my private business card. I spent my days working on design projects and my evenings on the phone with Caroline building our legal strategy. Richard sent daily aggressive demands for an emergency mediation, but Caroline stalled them flawlessly. She was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. One Tuesday, I drove to an organic grocery store in the heart of my old neighborhood. I was inspecting fresh strawberries when I heard a familiar grating laugh. It was Diane. She strolled down the aisle with Olivia aggressively holding court with two wealthy women from her local country club. I tried to turn my cart around, but Olivia spotted me. "Mom, look," Olivia whispered, pointing directly at me. "It is Naomi." Diane stopped. Her eyes lit up with malicious glee. She had an audience and she was ready to perform. She marched up to my cart, pulling her wealthy friends along. "Well, look who it is," Diane announced loudly. "I am shocked to see you shopping here, Naomi. I heard you were living in a cheap motel. Are you sure you can afford organic fruit these days?" The two wealthy women shifted uncomfortably, but Diane ignored them. She crossed her arms, a smug smile plastered across her face. "It is such a tragedy," Diane continued loudly. "Richard tried so hard to carry the financial burden of this marriage. But when a woman refuses to get a real job and drains her husband dry, what can a man do? He had to cut you loose. We are just so relieved he is finally moving on with a woman who actually brings value to the family." Olivia snickered behind her phone screen. I stood there clutching the carton of strawberries. A month ago, this public humiliation would have crushed me, but today, with $5 million sitting safely in a blind trust and a silver hard drive loaded with explosive secrets, I felt absolutely nothing but cold, calculated amusement. I looked Diane up and down, taking in her expensive silk blouse and the ostentatious designer handbag resting on her forearm. It was supposedly a luxury piece that cost upwards of $5,000. "I am doing quite well, Diane," I replied smoothly, my voice perfectly calm. "And I am actually glad I ran into you. I have been meaning to tell you something as a graphic designer who works closely with luxury brand typography." Diane frowned, her smug expression faltering. "What are you talking about?" I pointed directly at her handbag. "I am talking about your bag. The brass logo is stamped in Arial font instead of the brand's custom typeface, and the stitching on the leather handle is glued, not hand-sewn. It is a very cheap counterfeit, Diane. You might want to ask for a refund from whatever shady website you bought it from." The two country club women gasped softly. Diane's face flushed a violently bright red. She snatched her arm back, hiding the bag behind her hip. "How dare you?" she sputtered. "Richard bought me this bag for my birthday. It is completely authentic." I smiled a razor-sharp smile. "Oh, Richard bought it. Well, that makes perfect sense. It is a real shame he is currently sitting on $60,000 of secret credit card debt, paying for his pregnant mistress's hotel rooms. If he had not maxed out that hidden platinum card before he filed for separation, he might have been able to afford the real version for his mother." The silence in the grocery aisle was absolute. The two wealthy women stared at Diane in sheer shock. $60,000 of secret debt. A pregnant mistress. The perfect illusion Diane had spent years building shattered into a million pieces. Diane was completely speechless. Her face went sickly pale. She grabbed Olivia by the arm, abandoned her shopping cart right in the middle of the aisle, and practically ran toward the exit doors to escape the humiliating stares. The two wealthy women immediately pulled out their phones, no doubt eager to text the entire neighborhood about the massive scandal. I gently placed the carton of strawberries into my shopping cart, smoothed out my jacket, and continued my peaceful and quiet grocery shopping, feeling lighter and more powerful than I had in years. I returned to my extended stay apartment later that afternoon, unpacking my groceries with a renewed sense of purpose. The look of absolute horror on Diane's face was deeply satisfying, but I knew my work was far from over. I brewed a strong pot of coffee, sat down at my small dining table, and opened my laptop. Caroline had advised me to comb through every single subfolder on Richard's master hard drive. We already had him dead to rights on the marital waste with the $60,000 credit card debt, but Caroline always said a good lawyer prepares for war by gathering more ammunition than they could ever possibly need. I plugged the silver drive into my laptop and began clicking through the directories he had buried deep within his system. I bypassed the folders containing his endless spreadsheets of sales projections and corporate memos. Instead, I focused on a heavily encrypted folder labeled simply as Miscellaneous Archives. Richard was arrogant, but he was incredibly predictable. He used the same variations of his own birth year and his college fraternity letters for almost every password. It took me exactly 4 attempts to crack the encryption. The folder unzipped, revealing dozens of neatly organized PDF documents. I opened the first file and my breath caught in my throat. It was his federal tax return from 3 years ago. I opened the next file and then the next. He had kept meticulous, unedited records of his true income alongside the fraudulent documents he had actually submitted to the federal government. As I cross-referenced his actual tech sales commissions with the deductions, he claimed a chilling picture of massive financial fraud began to emerge. Richard had not just been cheating on me, he had been systematically cheating the Internal Revenue Service for the past 3 years. The sheer scale of his tax evasion was staggering. He had drastically underreported his quarterly commission bonuses, hiding hundreds of thousands of dollars in offshore shell accounts before transferring the money back into his secret platinum credit card. But the deductions were even worse. I scrolled through the itemized list of his supposed business expenses. He had written off the week-long luxury vacation to Cabo San Lucas with his pregnant mistress Brittany as an elite corporate networking retreat. He had claimed the $10,000 diamond tennis bracelet as a tax-deductible client appreciation gift. He even wrote off the expensive dinners and hotel rooms he used for his affair as necessary travel and entertainment expenses for his tech software clients. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was not just a messy divorce anymore. This was a severe federal crime. Richard had defrauded the government out of at least $150,000 in unpaid taxes. If the family court judge saw this, Richard would be destroyed. But if the federal government saw this, he would face total financial ruin, massive penalties, and possibly even prison time. More importantly, I knew exactly how the IRS operated when they discovered this level of fraud. They did not politely ask for the money back. They immediately issued a federal tax lien. They would freeze his bank accounts, garnish his current wages, and place an ironclad hold on any real estate tied to his name, which included the house he was currently trying to force me to sign over. A slow, dangerous smile crept across my face. Richard was fighting me for the equity in a house that was about to become a federal crime scene. I did not call Caroline immediately. This was a move I needed to make quietly, completely separate from our family court strategy. I needed to light the fuse and walk away before the explosion happened. I opened a secure, encrypted web browser and navigated directly to the official whistleblower page of the Internal Revenue Service. My hands moved quickly and methodically across the keyboard. I created a completely anonymous profile. I bundled the fraudulent tax returns, the hidden offshore transfer receipts, and the itemized credit card statements proving the fake business expenses. I attached the files to the secure federal portal. I typed out a clear, concise summary of his exact evasion methods, providing the dates, the amounts, and the names of the dummy accounts he used. I reviewed the submission one last time, ensuring there was absolutely nothing tying the report back to me or my new blind trust. With one firm click of my mouse, I hit submit. The screen loaded for a second before a green confirmation box appeared, thanking me for the anonymous report. The files were gone. The federal agents had everything they needed. A ticking time bomb was officially planted under Richard's carefully constructed life, and he had absolutely no idea The timer had just started counting down. 2 days after I sent those files into the federal database, the real world came knocking at my door. Literally. I was sitting at my dining table, sketching out a new logo design for a client, when a loud, sharp knock echoed through my small apartment. I looked through the peephole and saw a man in a plain gray polo shirt holding a thick manila envelope. "Are you Naomi?" he asked through the heavy wooden door. "Yes," I replied, unlocking the deadbolt and opening the door just a crack. He shoved the heavy envelope into my hands, snapped a quick photo of me holding it with his cell phone, and turned on his heel. "You have been served," he called over his shoulder as he walked down the dimly lit hallway. I locked the door and carried the envelope to the kitchen counter. My hands were perfectly steady as I ripped the seal open and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents printed on heavy cardstock. It was an emergency court summons. Richard and his high-priced legal team were not waiting for the standard divorce proceedings to run their course. They were aggressively escalating the timeline. I read through the dense legal jargon, my blood running cold at the sheer audacity of their demands. Richard's attorney had filed an aggressive motion demanding an emergency mediation session set for the very next morning at their upscale downtown firm. The attached settlement offer was nothing short of a financial execution. The terms were explicitly laid out in bold black ink. Richard was demanding that I immediately sign a quitclaim deed completely surrendering my entire ownership of the house that my father had helped me buy. In exchange, he generously offered to let me keep my used car and my graphic design computer equipment. But the real poison was buried deep in the debt division section. The document demanded that I formally accept legal responsibility for exactly $30,000 of the credit card debt he had accumulated. He was officially trying to make me pay for his pregnant mistress's diamond bracelets and luxury beach vacations. The final page of the summons contained a thinly veiled threat disguised as professional legal counsel. Richard's lawyer stated that my freelance graphic design business was financially unviable and that I entirely lacked the capital to sustain a prolonged legal battle. The letter warned that if I refused to sign this emergency settlement at the mediation, Richard would drag me into a brutal, ruinous public trial. They threatened to request that the judge force me to pay all of Richard's exorbitant attorney fees, ensuring I would be left completely bankrupt and drowning in legal debt for the rest of my natural life. He wanted to break my spirit. He wanted to terrify me into total submission so I would hand over the deed to the house before the Internal Revenue Service lien could be officially filed against his name. I did not panic. I grabbed my car keys, drove straight downtown, and slapped the thick stack of papers onto the glass conference table in Caroline's office. "Read this," I told her, pointing directly at the threatening letter. "He is demanding emergency mediation tomorrow morning. He wants the house, he wants me to take half of his secret debt, and he is threatening to destroy me in open court if I say no." Caroline picked up the documents. She adjusted her designer reading glasses and scanned the pages, her eyes darting back and forth across the aggressive legal threats. For a long moment, the room was completely silent. I watched her face carefully, waiting for a sign of concern. I knew we had the hard drive and the blind trust, but the sheer weight of a formal court threat still carried a heavy psychological burden. "Richard thinks I am completely out of options," I said, pacing the length of the room. "He thinks I am terrified of going to court, because I cannot afford to fight him. He is using this emergency mediation as a pressure cooker to force a blind signature." Caroline slowly lowered the documents back onto the glass table. She took off her reading glasses and folded them neatly. Then that familiar predatory smile slowly spread across her face. It was the smile of an apex predator who had just watched its prey walk willingly into a steel trap. "This is absolutely perfect," Caroline said, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. "This is exactly the kind of arrogant overreach we were waiting for." His lawyer is sloppy and reckless. They are trying to bully an unrepresented housewife, completely unaware that they are actually dealing with a multimillionaire who currently holds the keys to his federal prosecution. "So, what do we do?" I asked, stopping my pacing to look at her. "Do we reject the mediation demand and file an immediate injunction?" "Absolutely not," Caroline replied, cornered. Let him lay all his demanding cornered, let him lay all his demanding greedy cards on the table. Because the higher he climbs on his pedestal of arrogance, the harder the fall is going to be when we finally pull the floor out from under him. Let us go to war, Naomi. The very next morning, the sky over the city was a heavy, overcast gray, but I had never felt more radiant. I wore a sharp-tailored black blazer and pants completely shedding the tired, stressed freelance artist persona Richard had always forced upon me. Caroline met me in the lobby of the opposing law firm's building. She carried a sleek leather briefcase which held the certified documents of my $5 million blind trust, the $60,000 marital waste proof, and the confirmation of the federal tax whistleblower submission. We stepped into the elevator and rode up to the 50th floor in absolute focused silence. The reception area of Richard's legal representation was designed to intimidate. It was all imported marble cold steel fixtures and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. A receptionist led us down a long hallway, her high heels clicking sharply against the floor, and opened the heavy oak door to their primary conference room. We walked in, and the sheer arrogance in the room was physically suffocating. Richard sat at the head of the massive mahogany table. He was wearing his best tailored suit, leaning back in his leather chair, with his hands steepled together. He looked incredibly rested and obnoxiously smug. Sitting to his right was his attorney, a slick-looking man with an expensive watch and a patronizing smile that made my skin crawl. But Richard had not just brought his lawyer. He had brought his entire toxic audience to witness my execution. Diane was sitting near the window, her arms crossed tight. She glared at me clearly, still seething from our encounter at the grocery store, but her expression was laced with a triumphant vindictiveness. She had recovered her pride and was here to watch my total financial ruin. Olivia sat next to her, typing aggressively on her phone, barely bothering to look up to acknowledge my presence. And hovering near the back of the room, holding a thick leather-bound portfolio, was Jamal. He had shown up to the mediation with the sole intention of forcing me to sign the quitclaim deed so he could immediately secure the real estate listing for my house. They really brought the whole circus, Caroline whispered to me, her voice smooth and entirely unbothered. Let us take our seats and enjoy the show. We sat down opposite Richard and his attorney. Richard did not offer a greeting. He just stared at me, his eyes dark and completely devoid of any remaining affection. He truly believed he had me trapped. He thought my silence over the past few days was the silence of a terrified, broken woman who had finally realized she was entirely out of options. Let us not waste any valuable billable hours. Richard's attorney began opening a thick folder and spreading the documents across the polished wood. My client is offering a highly generous settlement to expedite this separation. We are fully aware that your client, Naomi, lacks the financial infrastructure to maintain the marital property or engage in a lengthy discovery process. Therefore, we have drafted a finalized agreement to spare everyone the pain of a public trial. The attorney pushed a heavily tabbed document toward the center of the table. The terms are completely non-negotiable. The attorney continued, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. Naomi will immediately vacate the premises and sign over all equity rights to the suburban property. My client will generously assume the primary mortgage. However, due to the communal nature of the marriage, Naomi will accept legal responsibility for exactly $30,000 of the accrued marital credit card debt. If she signs today, we will waive our right to pursue her for our legal fees. If she refuses, we will file a motion to freeze her business accounts by tomorrow morning. Diane let out a quiet, mocking laugh from her chair by the window. Finally, she muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Now maybe she will learn how to get a real job." Jamal stepped forward from the back of the room, placing his leather portfolio heavily on the table. He looked directly at me, a greedy glint in his eye. Once you sign the deed transfer, Naomi, I have a team ready to list the house by Friday. We have already arranged for a dumpster to clear out whatever items you leave behind in the guest room. Do not make this harder than it has to be." I looked at Jamal, then at Diane, who was actively smirking, and finally at Richard. They had orchestrated this entire morning to break me. They had brought the family to witness my defeat and ensure I felt completely isolated and outnumbered. They expected me to cry. They expected me to beg for a little more time or a slightly smaller portion of the debt. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He looked at me with absolute contempt, the mask of the loving husband permanently destroyed. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out an expensive silver fountain pen, and placed it on top of the settlement agreement. With a slow, deliberate motion, Richard slid the document and the pen across the smooth mahogany wood until it stopped directly in front of me. "You tried to play a game you do not understand, Naomi," Richard said, his voice cold and commanding. "But you are completely out of moves. Pick up the pen. Sign it. It is over." I stared at the silver fountain pen resting on top of the thick stack of legal documents. The room was so quiet, I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vents above us. I let my shoulders slump forward, intentionally shrinking myself in my leather chair. I perfectly executed the posture of a woman who had finally been broken by the immense suffocating pressure of a wealthy family's legal machinery. I reached out with a trembling right hand. My fingers hovered over the documents before brushing against the cool, expensive metal of Richard's pen. I picked it up slowly, letting it feel incredibly heavy in my grip. Across the table, Richard's lawyer let out a quiet, barely audible sigh of professional relief. He thought this was going to be an easy, billable hour. Jamal shifted his weight in the back of the room, tapping his leather portfolio against his leg, probably already mentally calculating the massive real estate commission he was about to make off my stolen home. I pulled the settlement agreement closer to me. I stared down at the crisp white paper, pretending to read the bolded terms one last time with a look of absolute soul-crushing devastation. "So just to be completely clear," I whispered, making sure my voice wavered and cracked just enough to sound thoroughly defeated. "I get $0 from the joint marital accounts. I completely lose the entire equity in the home that my father's life insurance paid for. And I take on exactly $30,000 of your newly acquired credit card debt." Richard nodded slowly, his expression completely devoid of any human mercy. "That is the reality of the situation, Naomi. You do not have the capital to fight this in court, and you certainly do not have the earning potential to maintain a mortgage on that house with your little online design business. This is the absolute most generous offer you are going to get from me. Take the deal today and walk away before things get genuinely ugly for you." From the corner of the room near the floor to ceiling windows, Diane leaned closer to Olivia. I heard the sharp rustle of her silk blouse as she moved. Finally, Diane whispered, not even trying to hide the pure venom in her voice, "The trash takes itself out." Olivia snickered softly, her thumbs flying rapidly across her glowing phone screen, as she likely texted the rest of their awful suburban social circle the good news of my total surrender. They were all practically vibrating with malicious joy. They had completely cornered the helpless artist, or so they thought. I held the pen poised just a fraction of an inch above the designated signature line. Everyone in the room subconsciously leaned forward. Richard held his breath. Diane stopped moving. Jamal stepped closer. Their greedy eyes were all fixed entirely on the tip of the fountain pen, desperately waiting for the dark ink to permanently sign my financial life away. Caroline sat perfectly still next to me. Her face was an unreadable mask of cold professional detachment. She did not urge me to stop, and she did not interrupt the opposing counsel. She knew exactly what I was doing. We had meticulously rehearsed this exact psychological moment in her office the night before. Instead of pressing the pen to the paper, I took a deep, steadying breath. I slowly lowered my hand. I placed the silver fountain pen back down on the polished mahogany table with a soft, deliberate click. The sound echoed like a gavel strike in the silent room. I straightened my spine, rolling my shoulders back and lifting my chin. The pathetic trembling in my hands completely vanished. The fake tears that had been pooling in my eyes evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating, and incredibly dangerous stare. Richard's smug smile faltered slightly, his eyebrows pulled together in confusion. "What are you doing?" he snapped, his voice losing its calm authority. "Pick the pen back up and sign the paper, Naomi. Stop stalling. We do not have all day for your dramatics." I pushed the thick settlement agreement back across the table, sliding it directly toward his slick attorney. The lawyer blinked in surprise reflexively, putting his hand flat on the document to stop it from sliding off the edge. "I am not signing this," I said, my voice ringing clear, sharp, and entirely steady in the tense room. "In fact, after thoroughly reviewing your highly generous offer, I realize your terms are based on a fundamentally flawed understanding of your own financial reality. You built this entire mediation on the assumption that you hold all the leverage, Richard, but you do not. I have a few crucial amendments of my own to make to this arrangement." Before Richard or his arrogant lawyer could open their mouths to interrupt me, I reached into Carolyn's open leather briefcase sitting on the chair beside me. I bypassed the standard legal forms and pulled out a sleek black folder. The atmosphere in the room suddenly felt incredibly cold. I placed the black folder squarely in the center of the mahogany table, keeping my hand resting firmly on top of it. I opened the black folder. Inside were perfectly organized stacks of paper, each representing a different nail in Richard's financial coffin. I took the first stack clipped together neatly and handed it to Caroline. She did not slide it across the table. She stood up, walked over and placed a copy directly in front of Richard's slick attorney, and then dropped another copy right in front of Richard. "What is this?" Richard demanded, staring down at the papers as if they were covered in poison. "That," Caroline said, returning to her seat and smoothing her skirt, "is the itemized transaction history of a hidden platinum credit card you opened exactly 7 months ago. The current balance is $60,000. You maxed it out completely right down to the last available cent just 24 hours before you filed your official separation paperwork." Richard's face dropped. The color completely drained from his cheeks. He looked frantically at his attorney, who was rapidly scanning the first page of the statement. "In your highly generous settlement offer," Caroline continued, her voice echoing clearly across the room, "you demanded that my client assume half of this debt. You claimed it was a communal marital burden, but I see you conveniently forgot to disclose to your own legal counsel exactly what this money was spent on." Richard's lawyer looked up, his professional composure cracking. "Richard, what is this?" he asked sharply. "You told me this was business debt from a failed software startup investment." "I suggest you look at page 3, counsel," Caroline instructed smoothly. "Unless your client's software startup required a $10,000 diamond tennis bracelet purchased from a luxury jeweler downtown, or perhaps the $15,000 week-long vacation to Cabo San Lucas at a 5-star beach resort was a corporate retreat. Oh, and let us not overlook the thousands of dollars spent at elite maternity boutiques over the last 4 months." A collective gasp rippled through the back of the room. Diane, who had been sitting so proudly just moments before, suddenly sat up perfectly straight. Her eyes darted toward Richard, her jaw practically hitting the floor. Even Olivia stopped typing on her phone. My client, Caroline stated firmly, was sitting at home paying the winter heating bill, while your client was draining marital funds to finance a lavish second life with his pregnant mistress. In this state, the family court defines this exact behavior as marital waste. When one spouse intentionally dissipates shared assets on a non-marital purpose, particularly an illicit affair, the court is extremely clear on the financial penalty. Richard's attorney was now visibly sweating. He rubbed his forehead, realizing his client had completely lied to him and led him into a massive legal ambush. "Because we have definitive proof of this marital waste," Caroline continued, her tone absolutely merciless. "Richard is solely and entirely responsible for 100% of that $60,000 balance. You cannot dump your mistress's shopping sprees onto my client. If you attempt to present this settlement offer to a family court judge, they will not just throw it out. They will heavily penalize Richard for attempting to commit financial fraud during a divorce proceeding. We are rejecting your demand for Naomi to take on $30,000 of debt. The debt is entirely yours, Richard. Every single penny of it. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The entire power dynamic of the room had shifted in less than 3 minutes. Richard's grand plan to financially cripple me had just evaporated into thin air. His own lawyer closed the folder and pushed it away, glaring at Richard with pure professional disgust. Lawyers absolutely hate being blindsided by their own clients, especially when it makes them look incompetent in front of opposing counsel. Diane looked like she was going to be physically sick. The illusion of her perfect high-earning son was crumbling right in front of her eyes. He was not a brilliant tech investor. He was a liar drowning in luxury credit card debt that he could not afford to pay off. Richard's hands balled into tight fists on top of the mahogany table. His breathing became heavy and erratic. His eyes darted around the room, realizing that his mother, his sister, and his brother-in-law had just witnessed his total humiliation. The smug, confident tech director was gone. In his place was a desperate, angry man whose back was finally pushed up against the wall. "Fine," Richard suddenly screamed, slamming his fist down on the table so hard the silver fountain pen bounced into the air. "Fine, I will take the debt. I do not care about the credit card, but I am keeping the house. That equity is mine, and you are not getting a dime of it." He turned wildly toward the back of the room, pointing a shaking finger at Jamal. "Jamal, get the real estate listing ready today," Richard yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "We are putting the house on the market tomorrow morning. I am taking the cash equity and she is getting nothing. Do you hear me, Naomi? You are still walking out of here with nothing." I looked at him, completely unbothered by his screaming. I reached back into my black folder. "Actually, Richard," I said calmly, "we need to talk about the house." I kept my hand resting firmly on the black folder. I did not look at Richard. Instead, I turned my attention to the back of the conference room, locking eyes with my arrogant brother-in-law. "Jamal," I said, my voice dripping with a sickly sweet politeness that made him physically flinch. "Before you start printing out those glossy open house flyers or calling your elite buyers, you might want to take a look at a very special document that was filed by the federal government at 8 o'clock this morning." I pulled a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper from the folder. It bore the unmistakable, terrifying official seal of the Internal Revenue Service. I stood up from my leather chair, walked halfway down the long mahogany table, and extended my hand, offering the paper directly to Jamal. Jamal hesitated. He looked at Richard, who was breathing heavily and glaring at me, then back at the piece of paper. Slowly, Jamal stepped forward and took the document from my hand. "What is this?" Jamal asked, his voice losing all its previous bravado. His eyes scanned the bold text at the top of the page. "That is an official notice of a federal tax lien," Caroline explained from her seat, her voice projecting effortlessly across the room. "And it is attached directly to the deed of the suburban property you are so desperate to sell." Richard bolted upright in his chair. "A tax lien? That is impossible. I pay my taxes." "This is a pathetic bluff, Naomi. You forged a document to scare us. The Internal Revenue Service does not bluff, Richard." Caroline fired back, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "And they certainly do not take it lightly when a high-earning corporate executive systematically defrauds the federal government for 3 consecutive years." I watched Jamal's eyes widen as he read the specific financial figures listed on the official notice. His hands actually started to shake. "You see, Jamal," I said, leaning casually against the edge of the conference table, "when I was going through Richard's master computer drive, I found something much worse than a secret platinum credit card. I found 3 years of heavily doctored tax returns. Richard has been drastically underreporting his quarterly tech commissions and funneling the money into offshore accounts. But the real kicker is what he claimed as business deductions. Richard's slick attorney threw his hands up in the air and violently pushed his chair away from the table. He looked absolutely terrified of being associated with federal fraud. "I cannot represent you in matters of federal tax evasion," the attorney stammered, his face pale. "You explicitly signed a disclosure agreement stating there were no pending federal investigations." He wrote off his pregnant mistress's diamond bracelets and luxury beach vacations as elite corporate networking expenses. I continued, making sure my voice carried to the corner where Diane and Olivia were sitting in stunned silence. I simply forwarded his true, unedited financial records to the IRS whistleblower portal a few days ago. The federal agents moved incredibly fast. Because of the massive scale of the fraud, they placed an immediate lien on his most valuable asset to secure the stolen funds. Diane stood up from her chair by the window. Her designer bag slipped from her grasp and hit the floor with a dull thud. "Federal fraud," she gasped, clutching her chest. "Richard, tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not bring the federal government down on this family." Richard could not even look at his mother. He stared blankly at the mahogany table, his entire reality crumbling around him. Jamal looked up from the paper, his face drained of all color. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. "The penalty," Jamal whispered, his voice cracking loudly. "The penalty on this lien is $150,000. "Exactly," Caroline said cheerfully. "Whoever takes ownership of that house also takes immediate legal responsibility for a $150,000 federal tax debt. The equity Richard was planning to steal from Naomi is completely wiped out. The house is a financial black hole. So, Richard, if you want the house so badly, you can keep it. My client is officially withdrawing any claim to the property. You can have the deed, the mortgage, and the massive federal tax penalty that comes with it." Richard collapsed back into his chair as if he had been physically struck. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He was completely trapped in a cage built entirely by his own greed. Jamal stared at the IRS notice in his trembling hands. As a licensed real estate broker, he knew exactly what this meant. Trying to list a house with a hidden federal tax lien was a massive violation of the law. He would lose his license, face massive fines, and potentially face criminal conspiracy charges for aiding a tax evader. The greedy ambition in Jamal's eyes was instantly replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. He aggressively crumpled the official federal document in his fist. He marched over to the head of the table and violently shoved the crumpled paper right into Richard's chest. "I am out," Jamal yelled, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "I am completely out. I am not losing my real estate license and going to federal prison over your disgusting tax fraud. Richard, you lied to me. You are completely on your own." Without waiting for a single response, Jamal grabbed his expensive leather portfolio, turned on his heel, and stormed out of the conference room. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him, the loud crack sealing Richard's absolute devastation. The loud crack of the heavy oak door slamming shut reverberated loudly through the expansive conference room, leaving behind a thick, suffocating silence. Jamal was gone, and with him went the very last shred of Richard's escape plan. The reality of the situation crashed down on the room like a physical weight. Suddenly, a sharp, gasping sound broke the quiet. Diane was clutching her chest, her knuckles turning stark white against the dark fabric of her silk blouse. She was hyperventilating, drawing in quick, shallow breaths that echoed harshly. The perfect, untouchable illusion she had meticulously crafted around her son was entirely shattered. "Oh my God!" Olivia shrieked, dropping her phone onto the carpet and rushing to her mother's side. "Mom, please breathe." But Diane could not breathe. Her eyes were wide with sheer terror. She was rapidly processing the devastating social and financial implications of a federal tax investigation. Her son, the brilliant tech director she endlessly bragged about at her exclusive country club, was completely broke. He was buried under hidden credit card debt, he had a pregnant mistress, and he was now targeted by the Internal Revenue Service for massive financial fraud. The sheer humiliation of it all was physically breaking her. Richard's attorney suddenly snapped into action. He aggressively shoved his legal pads and the disastrous settlement agreement into his briefcase. He did not say a single word of comfort. He snapped the golden latches shut, stood up, and briskly walked out of the room, effectively abandoning Richard right in the middle of the burning wreckage. Richard was now completely isolated. He slowly lifted his head from the polished mahogany table. His face, which had been pale with shock just moments ago, was rapidly turning a deep, violent shade of crimson. The veins in his neck bulged against the tight collar of his dress shirt. He had lost his attorney, his cowardly brother-in-law, his house, and his perfect reputation all in the span of 10 minutes. His shattered ego violently twisted into pure, unadulterated rage. He pushed his heavy leather chair back so hard it crashed against the glass wall. He slammed both hands onto the table, leaning forward across the wood, his eyes burning with a manic hatred. "You think you are so incredibly smart, do you?" Richard screamed, his voice raw and echoing off the expensive marble walls. "You think you just won." Caroline remained perfectly still, her posture relaxed and observant. I did not move an inch. I just looked up at him, letting his pure rage wash over me. "You still have absolutely nothing," Richard roared, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You can act as smug as you want, Naomi, but at the end of the day, you are still just a broke freelancer. You make pennies selling digital trash on the internet. You do not have a real corporate salary or an investment portfolio." He was panting heavily now, spittle flying from his lips as he desperately tried to claw back any sense of superiority. "I am a director of sales," Richard yelled, his voice cracking. "Even with a tax lien, I can earn that money back. I have a massive professional network. What do you have? You have a used car and a rented laptop. You are going to die in that cheap motel you are staying in because you cannot afford a real life without my money, funding your pathetic little hobbies." I listened to his hysterical rant without blinking. He was clinging to the very last narrative he had left. The lie he had forced upon me for years that I was financially worthless without his brilliant corporate guidance. He truly believed he was still intrinsically better than me because he thought I was poor. I let his words hang in the air for a long moment, allowing the absolute desperation of his insults to fully settle into the quiet room. Then I slowly shifted my weight in my chair. I reached down to the floor beside my feet. Until this exact moment, Richard had been so entirely consumed by his own arrogance and his aggressive demands that he had failed to notice the bag I brought with me to the mediation. It was not my old, frayed canvas tote bag. I lifted the sleek, structured bag and placed it gently onto the mahogany table. It was an authentic, limited edition designer briefcase, crafted from pristine black leather, complete with solid gold hardware. It was the kind of accessory that commanded immediate respect in high-end corporate environments, and it cost more than Richard made in an entire month. Richard stopped screaming entirely, his eyes locked onto the gleaming gold clasp of the briefcase, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. I rested my hands on the smooth black leather of the briefcase. The golden latches felt cool beneath my fingertips. Richard continued to stare at the bag, his chest still heaving from his aggressive outburst, but the blind rage in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a profound, unsettling confusion. He knew luxury brands. He knew exactly how much a limited edition piece like that cost. His brain was desperately trying to reconcile the image of the broke, helpless wife he had constructed in his mind with the wealthy, composed woman sitting across from him. "Where did you get that bag?" Richard asked, his voice dropping to a harsh, demanding whisper. I completely ignored his question. I flicked the twin golden clasps open. The sharp metallic clicks echoed loudly in the dead silence of the conference room. I reached inside the pristine suede interior and bypassed the folders containing his federal tax fraud evidence. Instead, I pulled out a single heavy sheet of watermarked bank paper. It was an officially certified financial statement representing the total liquid assets currently held within the Phoenix 33 Blind Trust. You just spent the last 5 minutes screaming that I am a broke freelancer who will die in a cheap motel, I said, keeping my voice incredibly calm and perfectly measured. You loudly claimed that you hold all the financial power and that I am completely dependent on your corporate salary to survive. I held the watermarked paper by the edge. I looked directly into Richard's eyes, watching the last remnants of his arrogant superiority flicker and fade into nervous anticipation. I just want to ensure that our financial disclosures are entirely accurate for the public court record, I continued. Because unlike you, Richard, I believe in total transparency when it comes to marital assets. I do not hide things from the people I am legally bound to. With a swift, smooth motion, I pushed the heavy paper across the polished mahogany table. It slid perfectly across the smooth wood and came to a stop right in front of him. Richard stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake ready to strike. He hesitated for a long second, his jaw clenched tight. Then, unable to resist his own desperate curiosity, he reached out and snatched the document from the table. He brought it close to his face, his eyes aggressively scanning the top header. He read the name of the elite downtown bank. He read the official certification stamp. And then his eyes dropped down to the bold black numbers printed at the bottom of the page, next to the total available cash balance. I watched his face as his brain attempted to process the mathematically impossible number. He blinked once. He blinked twice. The color completely drained from his face for the second time that morning. 3 million. Richard whispered, his voice cracking so badly it barely sounded human. $3,200,000. Behind him, Diane leaned forward, craning her neck to see over his shoulder. Her eyes locked onto the certified bank document. A sharp, incredibly loud gasp tore from her throat. She brought both hands up to cover her mouth physically, reeling backward into her chair, as if the piece of paper had punched her in the chest. Next to the window, the loud, sharp sound of shattering glass broke the tension. Olivia had gone completely rigid. Her expensive smartphone slipped right through her trembling fingers, hitting the hard marble floor and shattering the screen into a spiderweb of broken glass. She did not even look down at it. She just stared at me with her mouth hanging wide open in absolute shock. Richard looked up from the paper, his eyes wide and completely manic. "What is this?" he demanded, his hands shaking violently. "Is this a joke? Did you steal this money? Where did this come from? That is a certified post-tax." "Cash balance," Caroline answered, her voice cutting through his panic with absolute authority. "My client recently purchased a winning state lottery ticket. She claimed the jackpot anonymously through a blind trust to protect her privacy during these legal proceedings. That money is entirely real, Richard, and it is currently sitting in a highly secured vault." Richard stared at Caroline, then back down at the watermarked paper, and finally at me. I watched a terrifying transformation take place. The absolute panic, the crushing humiliation of his tax fraud, the intense fear of federal prison, it all vanished in a single instant. A dark, twisted light ignited in his eyes. His shock rapidly morphed into pure, unadulterated greed. He did the mental math in his head. He realized that this massive fortune could completely wipe out his secret credit card debt. It could pay off the federal tax lien. It could save his entire arrogant lifestyle. A manic, breathless grin spread across his face, stretching from ear to ear. He slammed his hand down flat on the bank statement, claiming it as his own. "You won the lottery!" Richard laughed, a wild, hysterical sound that filled the room. "We are still legally married. I get half. That is $1.6 million for me." Richard stared at me with wild, hungry eyes, his hands literally trembling as he practically hovered over the certified bank statement. In his twisted, desperate mind, he had already claimed the money. He had already used my secret fortune to erase his massive credit card debt, pay off his impending federal tax lien, and salvage his crumbling professional reputation. He truly believed his status as my husband still granted him unconditional access to my entire life. I did not flinch. I did not pull the paper away from him. I just sat back in my leather chair and turned my head slightly, looking directly at my attorney. Caroline did not even bother to look angry. She looked entirely amused. She reached into her open leather briefcase one final time. She bypassed the tax fraud evidence and the marital waste receipts. Instead, she pulled out a single, neatly stapled packet of paper. It was not a document we had drafted. It was a document Richard and his slick, now absent attorney had aggressively filed just days ago. Caroline placed the document flat on the mahogany table, right next to the $3 million bank statement. Not quite, Richard. Caroline said, her voice dropping to a low, incredibly sharp register. Let us take a very close look at the official timeline of events. Richard frowned, his manic grin faltering as he looked down at the paper Caroline had just produced. It was his own petition for legal separation. You were so incredibly eager to hide your end-of-year tech commission bonus from my client, Caroline explained smoothly, tapping a polished fingernail against the top right corner of the document. You were so terrified that Naomi might claim a fraction of your corporate salary that you rushed your legal counsel to file this separation paperwork immediately. You demanded that the county clerk officially record it before the end of the business day. Caroline traced her finger over the bright red ink of the official county stamp. Look at the timestamp, Richard, she instructed, her tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. Your separation was legally finalized and recorded at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday. You intentionally and permanently severed the marital financial community at that exact minute. Richard stared at the red timestamp, his breathing growing shallow. He swallowed hard, a fresh wave of panic starting to visibly wash over his face, though he clearly had not yet connected the final dot. So what? Richard snapped, defensively. I filed for separation. We are still married until the divorce is finalized. Half of that lottery money is legally mine. Caroline smiled, the coldest, most predatory smile I had ever seen. My client purchased the winning lottery ticket at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesday. Caroline said, articulating every single syllable with devastating clarity. That is a full 5 hours after you legally dissolved your shared financial assets. The silence in the conference room became so profound it felt like all the oxygen had been instantly sucked out of the air. Richard froze entirely. His mouth hung open, but the arrogant words he was preparing to shout died right in his throat. According to the date of separation laws in this state, Caroline continued delivering the final fatal blow to Richard's entire existence. The marital estate completely ceases to exist the moment that stamp hits the paper. Any income earned, any debt acquired, and any asset obtained after that precise timestamp is strictly separate property. She leaned forward, locking eyes with the broken man across the table. You built a legal wall to protect your bonus, Richard, but you locked yourself on the outside. That $3.2 million belongs entirely, completely, and exclusively to Naomi. You get absolutely nothing. Richard physically recoiled, as if Caroline had leaned across the table and struck him across the face. He looked down at his own separation, filing the red timestamp glaring back at him like a neon warning sign he had foolishly ignored. He had rushed to court to protect a bonus that was suddenly completely worthless compared to the millions he had just blindly forfeited. His own greed had executed him. If he had just waited one more day, if he had just treated me with an ounce of basic human decency instead of rushing to financially abuse me, he would have been a millionaire. But his sheer malice, his desperate need to leave me broke and homeless had triggered the exact legal mechanism that legally barred him from my fortune. Behind him, Diane let out a low, agonizing wail. It was the sound of a woman realizing her son had just thrown away millions of dollars out of pure, arrogant stupidity. Olivia pressed her hands against her face, completely unable to look at her brother. Richard's hands fell away from the bank statement. His shoulders collapsed completely. The ultimate trap had snapped shut, and he was the only one caught inside. The ultimate trap had snapped shut, and he was the only one caught inside. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound in the immaculate conference room was the ragged, wet sound of Diane weeping in the corner. Richard stood frozen, his eyes glued to the bright red timestamp on his separation filing. I watched the exact moment his brain finally processed the irreversible magnitude of his own stupidity. The muscles in his legs completely gave out. He did not sit back down in his leather chair. He collapsed straight onto the hard marble floor. His knees hit the ground with a loud, hollow thud. The sudden physical drop seemed to knock the last remaining breath from his lungs. He knelt there surrounded by the discarded legal documents he had weaponized against me, completely and utterly broken. The arrogant, high-powered tech director who had just threatened to throw me into the street and drown me in his mistress's credit card debt was entirely gone. In his place was a pathetic, trembling shell of a man staring at the absolute destruction of his own life. "Naomi," he whispered, his voice cracking so severely it sounded like he was physically choking. "Naomi, please." He scrambled forward on his knees, his expensive suit pants dragging across the polished marble. He reached out with shaking hands, his fingers desperately grabbing the edge of the mahogany table, right in front of where I sat. Tears began to stream down his face, thick and fast, dripping off his chin and staining his silk tie. "I am so sorry," Richard choked out his chest, heaving with violent, pathetic sobs. "I made a massive mistake, a horrible, stupid mistake. I was under so much pressure at work. The tech industry is so stressful right now, and I just lost my mind. I was not thinking clearly about anything. I do not want a divorce. I never wanted a separation. Please, you have to believe me." I looked down at him, my face completely expressionless. His desperation was a sickening display. He was not crying because he regretted betraying our marriage. He was not crying because he felt remorse for moving his pregnant mistress into my home. He was crying because he had just realized he was going to be completely broke, homeless, and facing a federal tax investigation while I was walking away a multimillionaire. "I love you, Naomi." Richard begged, his voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "We are a team. We have always been a team. I will cancel the separation filing today. I will call the county clerk right now and withdraw the paperwork. We can fix this together. I will kick Brittany out of the house tonight. I swear to you I will send her away. She means absolutely nothing to me. You are my wife. I need you." From the corner of the room, Diane let out another loud, pathetic wail. She had slid down the wall and was sitting on the floor, clutching her counterfeit designer bag to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Her golden child was completely ruined. Olivia was entirely silent, staring blankly out the massive glass windows, completely traumatized by the sudden implosion of her family's wealth and status. Caroline sat perfectly still next to me, watching the entire meltdown with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a failed experiment. Richard reached his hand up, trying to grab my blazer sleeve. "Please, baby." He pleaded, his face red and slick with tears and sweat. "Just give me one more chance. We can take that money and start over. We can pay off the debts. We can travel the entire world. We can do whatever you want. Just do not leave me like this to face the government alone. I will do anything you ask. I will sign the house completely over to you. I will pay back the credit card. Just please save me." I did not pull my arm away. I simply looked down at his trembling hand, then back up to his tear-stained, desperate face. The man who had mocked my career, belittled my contributions, and tried to steal the equity my dead father left me, was now literally begging at my feet for financial salvation. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No anger, no pity whatsoever, no lingering affection. The emotional bond I once held for my husband had been completely severed the moment I heard him laughing on the phone with his lawyer, plotting my total ruin. He had dug this grave with his own hands, driven by pure malice and arrogance. Slowly and deliberately, I placed the certified bank statement back inside my black leather briefcase. I snapped the golden latches shut. The sharp metallic clicks made Richard violently flinch. I stood up from the leather chair, towering over him as he knelt on the floor. I smoothed out the wrinkles in my tailored blazer, maintaining perfect composure. I looked down at him, locking eyes with the pathetic, greedy stranger he had become. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the absolute silence of the room fill my lungs, preparing to deliver the absolute coldest, sharpest rejection of his entire life. I looked down at the man kneeling on the floor. His suit was wrinkled, his face red, and his eyes begging for a mercy he never showed me. "You do not love me, Richard," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "You only love the safety net you thought I provided. For years you made me feel small. You constantly mocked my career, belittled my contributions, and tried to convince me I was entirely worthless without your corporate salary." He opened his mouth to protest, but I raised my hand, silencing him instantly. "Do not speak," I commanded. "You orchestrated a cruel plan to throw me out onto the street with absolutely nothing. You maxed out credit cards on your mistress and tried to legally bind me to that debt. You committed massive federal tax fraud to hide your money, and you invited your entire family here to laugh at my financial execution. You built this cage, Richard. You constructed every single bar with your own greed, your own arrogance, and your profound cruelty. Now you get to sit inside it. I am begging you," he whispered, his voice completely broken. "Please." "My answer is no," I replied simply. "I am not saving you. I am not paying your debts, and I am not staying married to a fraud." Diane scrambled up from the floor. She wiped her tear-stained face, trying to put back on her mask of suburban respectability. "Naomi, please," Diane pleaded, stepping forward with her hands clasped. "We are still family. Family forgives. Family stays united during times of crisis. We can sit down and figure this out. You have the resources now. You can help us fix this. We can start completely over." I turned my gaze to my former mother-in-law. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. "Family unity," I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what you call cheering while your son tries to steal my house? Is family unity what you demonstrated when you mocked me in the middle of a grocery store, bragging about his pregnant mistress? You never saw me as Family Diane. You only saw me as an acceptable target for your own raging narcissism. You raised a son who mirrors your exact lack of morality, and now you both get to suffer the exact consequences you deserve. Do not ever speak to me again." I turned to Caroline, who gave me a sharp, approving nod. We turned our backs on the pathetic scene. I did not look back at Richard sobbing on the marble floor. I did not look back at Diane clutching her chest. I simply walked out the heavy oak door, my head held high, leaving them completely behind in the burning wreckage of their own lives. Caroline and I walked down the quiet carpeted hallway toward the bank of elevators. The heavy weight of the past decade was finally lifted from my shoulders. I felt an incredible, undeniable sense of pure freedom. We pressed the button for the lobby. When the silver elevator doors slid open, I stepped inside, but before the doors could close, a loud, frantic voice echoed from the reception area. It was Brittany, Richard's pregnant mistress. She was standing near the receptionist's desk, clutching her expensive handbag, aggressively tapping her phone screen. She looked furious. "What do you mean his cards are declining?" Brittany yelled into her phone, completely ignoring the professional atmosphere of the law firm. "The hotel said the platinum card is maxed out. I need to speak to Richard right now." I reached out and held the elevator door open. "Are you looking for Richard?" I asked casually. Brittany spun around, glaring at me. "Yes, I am. His stupid credit card just declined at the luxury boutique down the street, and my hotel room is demanding immediate payment." "Where is he?" "He is in the main conference room," I replied smoothly. "But you might want to ask him about the $150,000 federal tax lien the Internal Revenue Service just placed on him this morning. Oh, and he is officially bankrupt. The platinum card you have been using is completely dead, and he does not have a single penny to his name." Brittany froze. Her eyes widened in absolute horror as the reality of my words sank in. "Bankrupt," she whispered, her face going pale. "Federal tax lien." I smiled warmly. Good luck with the nursery. I released the door. As the heavy silver elevator doors began to slide shut, I watched Brittany turn on her heel. She did not walk toward the conference room to comfort the father of her child. She practically sprinted toward the back exit stairwell, completely abandoning him the exact second the stolen money ran out. The heavy silver elevator doors clicked shut, officially sealing my past on the 50th floor. I rode down to the lobby, the gentle hum of the elevator feeling like the first real breath of fresh air I had taken in years. I walked out of the glass building and into the bustling city streets, leaving Richard, Diane, and their entire toxic world behind forever. 6 months passed since that explosive morning in the mediation room, and the dominoes of Richard's arrogance fell exactly as Caroline predicted. The Internal Revenue Service did not offer a payment plan or a gentle warning. They executed the federal tax lien with absolute ruthless precision. They froze every single bank account tied to his Social Security number. The tech firm, terrified of being associated with a high-level federal fraud investigation, fired him immediately. Richard lost his impressive director title, his company car, and his elite corporate network in a matter of days. With his accounts frozen and no income to pay the mortgage, the bank foreclosed on the suburban house. Richard was forced to pack whatever belongings he could fit into his car and move into Diane's unfinished damp basement. He eventually found a grueling entry-level sales job working 60 hours a week, but he barely saw a fraction of his paycheck. The federal government garnished the maximum legal percentage of his wages to satisfy the $150,000 tax penalty. Whatever pennies were left over went straight to paying the minimum monthly interest on the $60,000 credit card debt he had accumulated for Brittany. Brittany, of course, never spoke to him again. She changed her phone number the very same day she ran out of that law firm lobby. Diane suffered her own personal nightmare. The gossip from our encounter at the organic grocery store spread through her exclusive country club like a wildfire. Her wealthy friends, disgusted by the revelation of her fake designer bags and her son's federal crimes, ostracized her. She was quietly asked to resign from the neighborhood association board. She now spends her days trapped in her house, listening to the heavy footsteps of her ruined, bitter son pacing back and forth in the basement below her. But the collateral damage did not stop there. Jamal and Olivia quickly learned the true cost of aligning themselves with a narcissist. During the forensic accounting of Richard's hard drive, Caroline uncovered one final brilliant detail. Jamal and Olivia had secretly given Richard $40,000 of their own savings to invest in his fake software startup ventures. Richard had taken their money and immediately spent it on his lavish affair. When the federal government seized Richard's assets, Jamal and Olivia lost every single cent of their investment. The financial strain shattered their arrogant facade. Jamal could no longer afford the lease on his obnoxious sports car, and a local tow truck repossessed it right out of his driveway in broad daylight. The stress of the missing money and the constant fighting turned their marriage into a miserable, highly toxic war zone. They had eagerly cheered for my financial ruin, only to end up completely bankrupting themselves in the process. While their lives crumbled into dust, mine blossomed into something beautiful. I did not waste a single moment looking back at the wreckage. I officially dissolved the marriage, keeping my graphic design business and every cent of my blind trust. I spent the next few months expanding my portfolio, taking on high-end corporate clients who respected my talent and paid me what I was actually worth. But the ultimate victory came on a bright, sunny Tuesday morning in late spring. I sat in a beautiful, sunlit real estate office located hundreds of miles away from my old suburban nightmare. A warm, salty breeze drifted through the open windows. Across the polished glass desk sat my new real estate attorney, sliding a thick stack of final closing documents toward me. This was not a predatory home equity loan. This was not a desperate attempt to steal someone else's equity. I picked up a sleek gold pen and signed my name on the final deed transfer. I was officially the sole owner of a massive, breathtakingly beautiful oceanfront property. The house featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the crashing waves, a massive wraparound deck, and a completely private sun-drenched art studio right on the top floor. I bought it entirely in cash. There was no mortgage, no joint names on the title, and absolutely no one who could ever claim a single inch of it. I handed the signed deed back to the attorney, a deep, lasting sense of peace settling into my bones. I handed the signed deed back to the attorney, a deep, lasting sense of peace settling into my bones. That evening, I drove down the winding coastal highway and unlocked the front door of my new home for the very first time. I bypassed the luxurious living room and walked straight upstairs to the room I had specifically designated as my new graphic design and art studio. It was a massive open space with vaulted ceilings and wall-to-wall glass panels that offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the Pacific Ocean. I pushed the heavy glass doors open and stepped out onto the private balcony. The cool, salty wind whipped through my hair. The rhythmic crashing of the waves against the rocky shoreline below sounded like a steady, triumphant applause. I leaned against the sturdy wooden railing and took a long, deep breath of the crisp ocean air. I was completely alone, and for the first time in my entire adult life, I felt completely safe. I did not have to listen for the sound of an angry car pulling into the driveway. I did not have to brace myself for cruel, cutting remarks about my career or my fundamental worth as a human being. I thought back to the terrified, anxious woman standing in that dark suburban hallway just 6 months ago, clutching a small piece of lottery paper to her chest, while her husband casually plotted her financial ruin in the very next room. It felt like a lifetime ago. Richard and his family had spent years meticulously building a narrative where I was nothing but a fragile, dependent burden. They used money as a weapon to keep me compliant and insecure. They wanted me to believe that without Richard's corporate salary and his mother's social approval, I would completely perish in the real world. But their massive collective arrogance blinded them to the ultimate truth. I was never the weak link in that marriage. I was the sturdy foundation they were desperately trying to stand on. When I finally pulled that foundation away, their entire house of cards collapsed under the weight of its own toxic, undeniable rot. Society often pushes a very specific, damaging narrative onto people who have survived intense emotional and financial abuse. People will tell you that in order to truly heal and move forward, you must find it in your heart to forgive the people who intentionally tried to destroy you. They call it taking the high road. But I am here to tell you that the forgiving victim is a dangerous myth designed solely to protect abusers from facing the severe consequences of their own actions. You do not owe forgiveness to someone who actively plotted your downfall. You do not owe a second chance to people who smiled in your face while digging a grave for your future. Healing does not require reconciliation. Healing requires establishing ironclad boundaries and fiercely protecting your own peace. Walking out of that glass conference room and leaving Richard sobbing on the marble floor was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of profound self-preservation and justice. The ultimate revenge against a toxic narcissist is not engaging in screaming matches or drawn-out courtroom drama. The ultimate revenge is absolute, unshakable financial independence. When you control your own resources, you completely eliminate their ability to control you. They can no longer use money as a heavy leash to pull you back into their chaotic drama. My lottery win certainly accelerated my freedom, but the real victory was learning how to fiercely protect my assets and fight back against a rigged system. I used my resources to build a fortress they could never breach. Now I spend my days creating art, managing my highly successful design business, and enjoying the quiet sanctuary of a life built entirely on my own terms. I never check my rearview mirror because there is absolutely nothing back there worth looking at anymore. If you are currently trapped in a situation where someone is actively using finances, legal threats, or emotional manipulation to diminish your worth, I want you to know that there is always a realistic way out. Keep your eyes open. Document absolutely everything they do and quietly build your exit strategy in the shadows. The very moment they underestimate your intelligence is the exact moment you strike back and reclaim your life. Have you ever watched someone's own toxic plans blow up in their face? Tell me your stories in the comments. Never let anyone dictate your worth. Subscribe for more. One of the most profound lessons embedded in this story is the necessary destruction of the forgiving victim myth. Society constantly conditions us to believe that true healing can only be achieved by taking the high road and offering grace to those who have deeply hurt us. We are often told that family is everything and that forgiveness is a mandatory step in moving forward. However, Naomi's journey shatters this incredibly dangerous expectation. Her husband and his family did not merely make a temporary lapse in judgment, they orchestrated a calculated, malicious campaign of financial and emotional abuse designed to leave her completely ruined. When their toxic plans spectacularly backfired, their sudden pleas for family unity and forgiveness were not born from genuine remorse. They were born entirely from desperate self-preservation. Naomi teaches us a vital lesson about the power of absolute boundaries. You are under no moral obligation to save the people who intentionally built the cage meant to trap you. Refusing to forgive someone who actively plotted your downfall is not an act of bitterness or cruelty. It is a profound act of self-respect and self-preservation. Healing does not always require reconciliation or a tearful embrace. Sometimes the most authentic closure you can possibly achieve is looking your abuser in the eye, denying them the comfort of your forgiveness, and walking out the door without ever looking back. True empowerment comes from recognizing your own worth and refusing to let toxic individuals dictate your reality or access your resources. We must learn to stop setting ourselves on fire just to keep manipulative people warm. If you have ever had to establish an ironclad boundary to protect your own peace from a toxic person, please share your story in the comments below and subscribe for more.